Greetings, this is the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer Program. The acronym for the program is CREE, C-R-E-E, and that is my handle. The date is Saturday, July 27, 2019, in for a simulcast this afternoon with the co-moderator of this platform, but he also has his own platform known as Kofi Lion. You might know him as Max. And this is at his suggestion. He gives me lots of good suggestions because we're colleagues in this work. So he's been running across, it's not like that I haven't, but we've been running across these video game, I call them Pac-Man outs, when you start getting into a discussion as to how important phenotype is to anything that has to do with black people in the United States, how important phenotype is to any kind of reparations movement, which may or may not be as the ADOS advocates plan or would like to see, or just talking about black people generally. There are a lot of people who want to use that. The only video game that I'm like really, I remember Super Mario and I remember Pac-Man, but I would imagine there are versions of this, in the video games of the last 20, 30 years. But, there's always this way out. So if somebody's after you, and what you do is you just take your little Pac-Man off the screen and you enter some other one, and then all the big bad monsters can't come after you. So when we're in these discussions and we're starting to nail down definitions, and therefore we're starting to nail down where we're going to go logically, inevitably, invariably, it almost never fails, comes the argument. You just never get through with this argument of there's no such thing as race. Race is not real because it is a social construct, or scientists have even said that it's not real. We'll get to that in a minute. Scientists have said, first of all, what's the definition of a scientist? What kind of definition? Which scientists are saying it? Are they really saying it? Yeah. So, all this kind of stuff. And you're inevitably going to run into it because, as I've said in the program description, it seems like black people are just desperate to believe that we are being oppressed and mistreated for any reason. We want to believe it's anything. We want to believe it's for money, so we'll go out and enrich Jared, what is his name? Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, or any kind of capitalism versus socialism critique, or the latest one, at least in this country, is that racism is a result of slavery, not the other way around. And so, of course, as we go into the future in terms of reparations, then they're going to want to prioritize the slavery as the generator rather than the anti-blackness, which is really the only definition I think of race. I'm going to prove this. So I think we're going to prove it. So I want to think along with you. This is a workshop. I really look at my platform as a workshop. I think deeply about a lot of things. It's the way my brain works. It may even be a bit of a disability, but disabilities can be abilities too. I'm looking into whether or not I have something called low latency inhibition. And you can look that up if you want. But at any rate, you just definitely, I always want to think things through, look at it. I think if I thought things through to a really, really great degree over a long period of time, thought about the objections, decided whether or not the objections were valid, go back to the drawing board, come up with a new hypothesis, test it, chuck it around with people whose minds I respect, but I respect the minds of, so far, all the minds of the people who have come to this venue. So, yeah, I really just look at this YouTube platform for as long as it lasts as a workshop. So we're going to be thinking this through and talking this through, and hopefully Kofi is there. Kofi, can you confirm for me yet whether or not you can hear me? Because I can't hear anything from you. Yeah. Let me look in the, see if I see you, Kofi. I'm actually looking in the chat. Oh, okay. So Kofi, I see you in the chat, but I don't hear you. and I definitely have Uber Conference up. So I don't see you in Uber Conference. Maybe we weren't going to do that. Oh, I see. We weren't going to do that. Well, just to let you know, Kofi, Uber Conference is up. So if you want to talk, you can. But other than that, I guess I'll just head right into it. So, just check myself here. Okay, so this is Cardi B and Bruno Mars, and I don't know who the other fellows are in the back. And this was supposed to be some sort of retro. I think they did this at the Grammys, and it was a showstopper, right, where they were doing this retro cross colors thing. And I chose that picture because I really think that a lot of what's happening with the ADOS movement is just the cross colors remix, or the classism, capitalism versus socialism remix, that it's really not about our color. It's not about race. It's about something else. And so that's why we keep getting all these questions as to whether or not race is real. Okay, well, so what I want to do is just kind of step through the logic of, it's going to be a somewhat abstract. I don't want to make it too abstract. I want it what we call, I just learned this acronym, MAYA, M-A-Y-A, the most advanced yet acceptable. So I don't want to go over that line and bore you folks. But what I want to do is just step through the basics, the kind of kindergarten basics that we haven't thought about probably since we were 4 or 5 years old, because it really is, on some levels, it's that simple. And then, of course, as we go along, it gets less simple. But let's start with the basic thing about what is categorization to begin with, as regards, the phenomena, whatever it is that we experience. We all categorize. We begin categorizing when we're infants. That's why if you have an infant will point to the neighbor's cat and the neighbor's dog, and may use the word cat for both animals, and may use the word cat for any animal that it sees with 4 legs. Eventually, you begin to. So that's the beginning of the infant being able to differentiate, say, something that walks on 4 legs versus a plant, a tree, or a person. And then later on, as they learn the difference between a cat and a dog and a rabbit, they differentiate. Now, there are many creatures on this earth that don't have words for that, who don't go into great detail about categorizing, not the way that people do. But categorization and nature are 2 different things. I mean, you can observe nature. The sky is just the sky. And you get past a certain level in the sky. If you go up in a rocket, you won't see blue anymore. You'll see black. And to us as humans, we could say, okay, we've now categorized that this is space. And then if we get back lower in the atmosphere, we'll get back into Earth's atmosphere. We'll call that the air or the sky. Right? So our brains work in tandem with what we can sense, at least what we can perceive as reality. But categories and symbols, which is a version of the sort of same thing, it's different from the real thing. Just like the flag of the United States of America, it's not the United States of America, right? It's a symbol for it. We categorize. Okay, so so let me go to the PDFs and show you what I'm talking about here. Black screen, PDF, open. And we'll go all the way over to 2A. I believe I've organized them correctly. This is all going to go to whether or not the differences between black people and other peoples make a difference. Do they make a difference to the way people treat us? Do they make a difference are they correlated? Do they signal some other differences between us and other peoples? How important are these visual, phenotypical differences that black people have with other people of the earth? Okay, so it all goes to that if you've got the patience for it, if you've got the patience for it. We will see. So for the first one is we'll stay on the topic of race. Differences. The use of genetic ancestry versus race in biomedical human genetic engineering. Human genetic research. The reason I use this one is to demonstrate that scientists do not have a consensus as to whether or not race is real, to what extent, Now, if you look at their behavior, yeah, they do have a consensus because they use it. That's the purpose of this. So I'm just going to go down and hope that I can find something that I highlighted. Here we go. So the first thing I highlighted is something called genome geography. So genome geography refers to how, through the tools and practices of human genetics, bits of genomic sequence become associated with specific geographic locations, posited as the place of origin of people who possess those bits. Yeah, I'm not sure why I highlighted that, but that goes to just the assumption that people have always, that look a certain way, have always been where they are today. Okay, then the next one talks about, it talks about the software that is being used to differentiate. I think I might just want to get right to it, because now I remember what I wanted to use this for. So what I wanted to use this for, I'll just read that part anyway. This article focuses on the production and consumption of a software package and its incorporated algorithms as used in human genetic variation and biomedical genetic studies. Okay, I know that's real complicated. What's that saying? What that is saying is that somebody put together some little formula. And we're going to be talking about formulas all along here. We're going to be talking about formulas for blood sugar, formulas for, for fat mass, all that kind of stuff, as differentiates black people from other people. But they're little formulas. Most of the time they're formulas. And the formulas, of course, are based on assumptions. I have a formula, right, on how to determine if somebody's black based on how they look. And there are some assumptions in that formula, but I set out what those assumptions are. So there are always assumptions which you may or may not agree with. Okay, now, the main point of this, after all that talking, I forgot what my main point was on this one. Oh, okay, so what it is I want you to see the article so you can look it up for yourself. Social studies of science. Now notice that these are social scientists. These are not biological scientists that have an issue. This is even a journal of social scientists. Social science wants the physical world to conform to their wishes. Most of us want the physical world to conform to our wishes. That doesn't mean that it does. So a lot of social scientists, most of them are left-leaning, right? That doesn't mean they're not racist, okay? But they're left-leaning, and they want the physical world to conform to their social wishes, which is that nobody paid attention to race. Of course, they always do. And that's how they, I'll tell you what, I think black people who are on that line wish that if nobody saw any differences, there wouldn't be any racism. So there's no such thing as race, and therefore there can't be any such thing as racism. The non-black people who are left-leaning, who wish that there was no such thing as race, they don't really wish there was no such thing as race because they know there is. They just don't want us to talk about it. In other words, if we say that race doesn't exist, or which is the same thing as saying that there's only one race, the human race, that's ridiculous. That's like, if there's only one thing, then you can't have variations of it, right? So I don't know what the simplest variation of that was, but let's suppose that the only ice cream that had ever been made on the planet was butter pecan. There'd never been made, nobody had ever thought about it. We said well, what flavor of ice cream? Everybody look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean flavor? Ice cream is ice cream. It's butter pecan. So if you say that the human race is the only race, that's about saying that's the same thing as saying there's no race. Okay. And so I can hear a little feedback, but I don't know if that matters. But I can hear it, so I'm thinking maybe.
Oh, okay, my fault. No, you're not gonna hear it. You're not gonna hear it now.
Okay, very good. All right, so you'll find that in medical research.
Oh, okay, my fault. No, you're not gonna hear it. You're not gonna hear it now.
What they go to great lengths. And I don't know why I didn't highlight the right part, but they go to great lengths to try to figure out any other way to categorize it. This is it. They go to great lengths to try to figure out any other way to categorize the basic groups of people besides race, and so or what's called genetic ancestry. And I'm still hearing it a little bit, Kofi. So they use these algorithms
Like race.
that plot a whole bunch of things. So they take. I'm going to stop for a
Um,
second because
I'm
this is
sorry.
really distracting me.
Yeah, my fault. Little technical difficulty.
Yeah, you.
It'll be good
Yeah,
now.
you know I can't.
Great lens though. My fault, Cree.
Well, I can't get mad over any kind of technical difficulties. You know that, because my TQ score, my technical quotient, very low, as far as this kind of thing. Anywho, so what they do is they just take DNA snippets. And by the way, DNA and genes are two different things. I didn't know that till about 4 or 5 years ago. So they take DNA snippets and they say, well, we don't want to use any prior assumptions. We don't want to set things in categories that we think we already know about and then compare them, because people may not conform to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a bunch of DNA snippets, and then we're going to scan them all, and then we're going to see what kinds of genes are there and what the variations of each gene are. Could be like the length of the intestines, or a twist in the intestines at a certain point, or the shape of your eardrum, the shape of your lobe, all kinds of internal things, little biochemical switches to turn off this or that, to know when you're cold, when you're hot, or what's going to make you get up and think that you're bored, or when your shoulder blade is going to lock, when it's not. There's all kinds of instructions that DNA can give you. So they take all these snippets, and what they do with these algorithms is they splash them on a screen, and then they see where the dots land. Like, so this group of people seem to have six or seven or eight or 10,000 things in common that may not have anything to do with phenotype. And they may have something to do with phenotype, but they're trying to get away from phenotype. And so what they come up with is these ways to categorize people. And this I do want to address one of the people who was kind enough to go back and forth with me. I don't remember which video it was, but they wanted to argue with me about whether or not the people in the Pacific Islands, the Papuans, the people on Fiji, there's another one too, all out there in the Pacific Islands, whether or not those were black people, because supposedly genetically they're more similar to Asians. Well, genetically similar in what way? I mean, 80% of, let's see, is it bananas, onions, corn? I think corn shares like 80% of its DNA with humans. Chimpanzees share about 95. They used to say 96 or 98, and I know why they changed it. They changed it because they realized saying that is very dangerous if you're going to say that all non-Africans have DNA as much as 4% and black people don't have any. So it's very dangerous. Then you definitely want to make sure now that other creatures that are totally different than people, you want to make sure that the gap is wider, because they used to say the chimpanzees had 96 to 98% similarities to people. But the point is that there are all kinds of, we share DNA, all the creatures on this planet, we share a lot of DNA, but it's not really about how much you share, because one difference, you could have just a difference in one gene set. It's not just the quantity that could change the whole look of the person, the whole ability of the person to function. Just a few little changes between one species or one breed and the next. So how much makes no difference at all. And so trying to bend yourself around in circles to say that, oh, well, Solomon Islanders and Papuans have more in common, and they're really looking at things that don't really make a difference in our daily lives, or that at least at this point we don't know they make a difference. Now we know phenotype makes a difference. We can prove that by data as to how people treat each other. But yeah, to just go ahead and say, well, we have all these things in common, that they have more in common because they're shorter. We're not going to group people. Let's just stop the silliness. Not a 5-year-old child and a 90-year-old person. Nobody is going to say a meaningful grouping of people. This is what I'm talking about in terms of using your intelligence in categorizing. Nobody is going to say that a meaningful group of people, in terms of the affairs of the world, no one's going to say that that's going to be organized by the shape of the earlobe, or where the intestines twist, or how dark green can be before it looks like another color to you, or how long your nail beds are, or any combination of those things. The affairs of the people of this planet are not arranged that way, and they have not been arranged like that way ever. On the other hand, the phenotype of people has for a very long time determined the affairs of the world. Now, and it probably has, I mean, my hypothesis, I think, is a very reasonable one. I don't think most people will disagree with it, is that this is not a very interesting thing to look at while you're listening to me talk, is it? My hypothesis is that the bias is probably that non-black people, they're a little bit uncomfortable with about how different we look, because they were uncomfortable with each other. Even the Europeans, different kinds of Europeans look different. They used to call the different kinds of Europeans racist, right? Lathrop Stoddard wrote a book called Racial Realities in Europe. He was not talking about anything other than Europeans, but there are a lot of different types of Europeans, right? So I suppose that there's a bias for non-black people to look at black people and say, well, they look really, 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 really different than all the rest of us. I mean, it took me a while to get used to, if you're German, took them a while to get used to a Turk or an Italian or an Armenian or a Greek, maybe even a Scandinavian. But then he or she became aware that there were people in China, and it took them a longer time to get used to that. Yeah, but with transportation and media, you begin to see, oh, well, they look a little different, but they act like us. In the same way that a child would say, a child looks at different kinds of cats, Siamese. I don't even know all the different kinds of cat, so I wish I did. But yeah, let's go to dogs. I know more breeds. Maybe a greyhound and a chihuahua, a golden lab. At first, those might look like totally different animals. And the child may not know what to expect. But over some period of time, you say, oh, they look different. I mean, I can definitely tell them apart. But, I mean, if I see another dog that looks, I'm going to know it's a dog. Even if it looks different than these three breeds that I know about, I know it's a dog and I know what to expect. I'm not totally fearful. I don't have issues because I know what to expect. It falls into my category and other people's categories. A dog I check with other people. Other people call them dogs. Okay, so I think the bias is for them. That's what the data shows, because the less non-black people are around black people, the lower their implicit association test scores. In other words, the lower their implicit, supposedly subconscious bias. But I think that's their I think that when they're not around us, they do tend to think of us the way a child would think of as a different breed that is essentially the same. And then they get around us. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my PDF, and I'm going to quote Lathrop Stoddard, the same man who wrote Racial Realities in Europe, said the following. You're going to have to give me a chance to look for it because they're so bunched together here. I think it's this one. Is it? Yep. Okay. So this is my white paper on how I measure. And then down here I have highlighted what Lathrop Stoddard said about black people. Okay? So you gotta understand, in this book, so he wrote two books that I'm talking about in this broadcast. One I've already mentioned, The Racial Realities of Europe, and that was just about white people. But then he wrote another book called The Rising Tide of Color, and that's very famous. It's much more famous, and this is what he said. Well, this is what I say, and then I'll tell you what, you can see what he said. So as global transportation and media has exposed people all over the world to each other, the sensitivity to physical difference by non-black people has collapsed. This is what I mean in terms of them not really having issues with Greeks and Japanese and Chinese. So it has collapsed, except at the extreme end of the spectrum, noted by well-known author Lothrop Stoddard in his 1921 book, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. And I need to take just a little break here and let you know that the ruling paradigm, in my opinion, very strongly, but we're here as a workshop, it's not white supremacy, it's anti-blackness. White supremacy is a derivative. In other words, it came as a result of anti-blackness and not vice versa. Okay, so now let's look and see what Lothrop Stoddard said. He said, from the first glance, we see that in the Negro, we are in the presence of a being differing profoundly, not merely from the white man, but also from those human types which we discovered in our surveys of the brown and yellow worlds. The black man is indeed sharply differentiated from the other branches of mankind. So don't get so close to the mic, causes feedback. Okay, got it. Sorry, Kofi. Okay. Hopefully I'm okay. Can you text me again and make sure I'm okay? So, in that book, that same, probably the same page, if not, it's somewhere in the next 2 or 3 pages where you will find what he was saying about black people being sharply differentiated. He goes on to not only talk about the physical differences, but he says that the most outstanding quality is our our animal energy, something like that. It was like, in other words, and it wasn't really said like he meant it as a bad thing, right? But he just said we had a whole bunch of energy for anything that we did. And I think this is what people experience when they get around us. And so yeah, I want to demonstrate that. I think to the degree that there is science that can validate that Lothrop Stoddard was right, that we just awe people, we awe them. When you've got a lot of life force, see, I call it life force. I've used that term before. Black people have more life force than anybody else, and I've got some data that I want to show you to the extent that science today in its crude ways can validate that. I'm going to show you that. But if you've got more life force, it's going to blow people away. It's going to intimidate people. It's going to awe them. It's kind of like fire. You don't want to really be without it because you know you're going to need it to warm you. So you know you're going to need black people's energy and creativity. You know, the whole world works on black people, particularly to American people's creativity. So you don't really want to get away from it, but you also know that fire can just eviscerate you. It can hurt you. It's very useful, but it's very dangerous. So you know, there's the same relationship that we have with fire, I think non-black people have with black people. Okay, and I think that there's data that shows that. There's Lothrop Stoddard's statement, but there's a very modern statement of it. I don't want to show this guy's video or even give his full name because I don't want to give him that much. I just don't want to give it to him. There's a white guy out there who's a pretty big rage right now, and all he does is make videos on how desirable black women are to white men. That's it. Just how desirable black women are, blah, blah. And he, I've watched like 2 or 3 of his videos. He's a white guy in his mid-40s. And, but, you know, one of the things he says is that he doesn't want to throw black men under the bus. People think that he's just out to just try to throw black men under the bus. And he said, well, you know, what I want to tell you is that one of the things that white men find so attractive about black women is just, not only do we find you incredibly feminine, which, you know, but we find you to be, he says, we find you to be the epitome of womanhood, but I want you to know, he says, this is modern day, so this is a modern day white guy saying what Lothrop Stoddard said 100 years ago, right? So I want you to know that what we see in the way that you move and the way that you talk and all of that stuff, we see high levels of energy. That's extremely attractive to us. But you have to understand, we see the same thing in black men. There's just something that he says he's sorry that if it's a stereotype, black men, it's different styles. Black men have a different style of it. But black men just have more life force. Black women have more life force. Black women have more life force that is in a feminine style. Black men have more life force that is in a masculine style. Hopefully I didn't misspeak because I very often switch up words. But yeah, so we're different now. Are those differences enough to say, well, this is an entirely different breed slash race of persons? I think so. I mean, if you look at the evidence, if you look at how people treat us internationally and within any particular jurisdiction, any particular nation state, you see that black people are on the bottom of life expectancy and everything else that's good. So clearly, there's some organization of behavior of non-black people towards black people that indicates that they think it is significant. And this goes back in history. This isn't just in the United States. It isn't just modern. There was racism. There's a book called Racism in Classical Greece and Rome. I mean, this has been going on for as long as there have been non-black people and black people. You can look up. I don't have that ready for you because I can't just have everything. But yeah, there's been a bias towards against our phenotype for a very long time. African students were getting beat up, and crowds were going around them, surrounding them, and basically threatening to lynch them because they thought the black guys were taking their women. I mean, it's all very similar stuff, and non-black women have their own issues with black women too. It's just that it usually doesn't go to physical violence. They let their men do that, and they let them starve us out. But they deprive us of resources. So theirs is more of a long game in terms of the war that they have out of, to a great extent, sexual envy. Because if you think about it, life force is just sex is an extension, and sexual appeal is an extension of the life force. But you can see a greater life force in black people in everything that we do. And we don't necessarily, quote unquote, mean to be sexy, right, when we're standing in line. But I mean, if you're a black woman, if you looked at a black man who's just doing nothing but standing there, he's in a line, and all he's doing is just maybe he moved his weight from one foot to another, or maybe he pushed his sunglasses up on his face or whatever. There's just something about the way that arm goes back down, or something about the way his shoulders move, or something when he shifts his weight from. It's sexy. And it's sexy in a way that I can't have, I very rarely, I'm not going to say never, but I very rarely seen, very, very, very rarely seen in non-black men. And I would imagine it's the same thing with black women, but I kind of got off on a tangent. All right. So I thought I had these in the order that I wanted to. I think I'm going to just try to go through them in the order that they're here. So, because this is about whether or not race is real. Well, I think I'm showing the social evidence that race is real, because we're treated by how we look. Race is real because we're treated by how we look, which is what I said. Let's see. I'll just go through it. In the paper. Yeah. In the paper itself. So maybe I'll just go back to that. Nope, that's not it. Huh. Which one? I was just on it. I don't want to. It is because it gets. I guess I've been trying to avoid this part of it because it's the part I know that is most likely to make people yawn. Except that I think it's important. I know it's here. It's the same one. Hopefully those things are interesting to you as you're looking at them. We'll get to them. All right. Let's just look at one. It's not that one. It's not that one. That's Pluto. That's algae. That's and I'll bet you that what I did was got rid of it. And that's the last thing I want to do. I bet you that no, I'm so sorry, people. I will bet you that I that I closed it. All right, so now here's the meat of it, the part of it that I'm afraid is going to make people yawn, but it has to be done. And as you can see, this is a white paper on what is a black person. But before we get into that, let's get into this question of whether or not race is real. although we've dealt with it some already. Okay. Here it is. There are some people out there with extra credit who have actually read the white paper, but anyways, I know people have busy lives. Hopefully I'm not too close to the mic. Okay, so this is called Section 2 in the paper, and it's on the question of whether race is scientifically real or merely a social construct. I'm going to just read right through it. I don't know any other way to do it well. The correct answer to any question hinges on definitions of terms. How many times have you heard me say that about what a black person is? The terms race, real, and social construct are what is at issue in this instance. The more obvious seems the meaning of a term in a controversy, the more likely that term is to be the source of confusion. So let's start with something obvious. What's real? That seems very obvious. What is real? I don't think it's that obvious though, see? What is real? For scientific purposes, what is deemed as quote unquote real have two criteria. Number one, it is registered in a person's brain via one or more of our physical senses or indirectly through reason and effect, such as termites or electrons or the Earth's orbit around the sun or a story. So it doesn't have to be something tangible, but it has to be able to make an effect on your physical senses. You have to be able to hear it, see it, taste it, touch it, or smell it. It has to make that impression on you. And the second criterion is that it is something that somebody else, one or more other persons, have said makes the same impression on them, or they behaved as such, so you could reach that conclusion. So you have people who come to an agreement, even if it's just two people. But usually if we're talking about something that has wide effect, like the color red, or a race, the Negro race, or the black race, of course, it's got to be more than two people. But I'll get to that in a minute. So something is real only to the persons in criterion 2. In other words, it's real to the two people who agree that they have experienced the thing and they have experienced it in the same way. And they will come up usually with some sort of utterance, some sort of word or term or symbol to denote that thing. Okay, and remember, we're talking about whether or not race is real. So please please hang in there. So what is a social construct? So they say race is a social construct, as if our social construct is a meaningless thing. Somebody dropped off the line and is now giving me issues, so I'm going to have to, before I move on, I got to go back to my studio here and mute something. Okay. So what is a social construct? Since the minimum number of people to constitute a society is 2, like on a desert island somewhere, by definition, everything we deem as scientifically real is a social construct. In other words, for something to be real, it is a social construct. So you can't just dismiss something by saying it's a social construct. A cat is a social construct. I should just keep reading. A rose is a social construct. So is a constellation of stars or a solar system. A planet is a social construct. At one time we thought Pluto was one. Then they say it wasn't. Now they're disagreeing that it might be again. A song is a social construct. The words for these things exist because people have agreed that they observe them in the same ways and that they have features or characteristics that strike them as significant. Now, so what is race? So here's my definition of race. Race is a collection of persons who have a cumulative similarity of a collection of 3 or more traits of appearance, that means phenotype, that is significant enough to distinguish them visually from all other collections of persons as agreed by more than half of all people who encounter them and by the persons themselves. They look at us, they think we're different. We look at them and we say, oh, we're different than you. And half of each group of people. 3 is the minimum number of traits that does not displace obvious hybrid persons within the black race. At some point before the Tasmanians from the island near Australia became extinct, they met or were near that minimum construct of race. But here's the key part right here. Race is real because it is a social construct. So you can't wave it away and say race isn't real because it's a social construct. No, it's real because it's a social construct. We see the realness in its social construct by the social behaviors of people who do not have our phenotype. They've made it real. Their social behavior, their social construction has made it real as if it weren't. Well, why were they motivated to make it real? Were they motivated to make it real for slavery's sake? Were they motivated to make it real because they wanted to get money off of capitalism? Why have they made it real? Okay. Well, I think that the reason they've made it real, I talked about at the beginning, which is that they get around us and we're valuable, we're awe-inspiring, but we have to be kept in check. You know, it's like you could call us fire, but you could also call us water. Any natural force that you need, but it can completely overwhelm you. And I think that is what non-black people feel in our presence, which would explain why they haven't completely eradicated us from the earth. But then they do all kinds of stuff that they think is helpful to them, and then they find out they've messed up the ecosystem. And then, you know, things become extinct that they don't necessarily even intend to. So even if they don't intend to make us go extinct, their behaviors could make that happen. Now, I want to show some scientific evidence that would undergird this hypothesis that it is our greater life force that is correlated to our phenotype that is the problem. Okay, so indulge me again is to make sure that I haven't left anything off. I thought I had put them in the order that I wanted to. Okay, I did. This article again was just about them trying to figure out a way to group people by earlobe and intestines size and all kinds of things they could except for phenotype. But they use phenotype all the time, and I'll be able to demonstrate that as we go along. Some of this stuff is just repetition, but okay. Which one? What is this about? Oh, the difference between a species and a subspecies. According to science, they get into breeds, and they say, well, as long as you can procreate with one another, you're the same species. Okay, yeah. And so that's why people say there's only one race, the human race. Well, what do you mean there's only the human species? I can buy that, right? But obviously, we're not talking about species. We're talking about a differentiation between the species, whether or not you want to call that a subspecies or breed, or the more common word, race. And race is even used in some real old text to differentiate between different breeds of other kinds of creatures, other types of mammals. And so it's just a classification system. It's an advanced one, but it's an extension of what babies begin to do. You know, whether or not black people are a different breed or different subspecies of people. We're sure we're people because we can procreate with other Homo sapiens. But, you know, scientists just decide where to draw lines. There are differences in butterflies. There are differences in all kinds of things. And then scientists just have to decide which side they fall on, even you know, things that aren't mammals. But there's no... At some point it becomes a little bit arbitrary, but when you start to see a distinct difference in how something looks, then you call it something different, even if they can procreate with one another. You can see we can do this with just about any other creature, but for some reason people don't want to do it with, not for some reason, I've already talked about the reasons that non-black people don't want to do it with people and black people don't want to do it with people. Okay. I got ahead of myself here because I started talking about stuff. I had like graphics for everything, but I got ahead of myself and started talking about it before I showed you the graphics. So this is just a screen capture of another classification problem. Is Pluto a planet? People classify things. And this is what I really want to get to. Just because you have a hard time telling between telling whether or not Pluto is a planet, does that mean that there's no such thing as planets? You wouldn't say that, would you? Just because there are things that are on the borderline of something, you wouldn't say they don't exist. You just wouldn't do that. You would just say, well, we're having problems with this one, but in the main, yeah, we think that there are planets. Same thing with algae. So, here's the question I ask: what kingdom do algae cells belong to? And then they say they're protist, and the protista, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Oh, some of them used to be included in the animal kingdom and some in the plant kingdom, and now it's divided into a not yet adequately circumscribed kingdoms. In other words, they don't know how many. But that doesn't mean there's no such thing as algae, nor does that mean there's no such thing as plants or animals. Just because you have these borderline cases doesn't mean that the borderline cases make the whole categorization system ridiculous. So you have a few things that are on the borderline between a bird and a fish, or a plant and an animal, or a protist and an algae, or one type of deer or another. So you do. Does that mean there's no such thing as any of them? There's no deer? There's no algae? There's no butterflies? No. Don't be silly. We categorize because things are meaningful to us, because these different kinds of creatures do different types of things. They're meaningful. Even if they just look different to us and make a different impression upon us and put us in a different mood because they smell different or look different or feel different, that's something. That's making an impression. They're different, and so they're different enough to where we have a word for that differentiates them from other things that might be similar. This one is not. This is just for the purposes of categorization. This isn't about life so much, but Prius is really good with gas mileage. A Lamborghini is good for performance, speed, acceleration, and stuff like that. And they're different in some ways, and they're alike in some ways. Here's the specs. I don't necessarily understand what all this stuff is, but you can see that the power is different, the torque is different, they're hugely different. But there are some things where they're very, very, very similar. The length of the car is similar. Certainly, if you took a child to look at it, they wouldn't know the difference. I mean, they would just say it's a car. The width of the cars are somewhat similar. The height somewhat similar. The wheelbase is somewhat similar. This is why children and babies, they wouldn't know much difference. Curb weight, whatever that is. But there are a lot of differences in performance. I think we saw that earlier. But we categorize them as different because they are different, even though they are a different car. They have a different name because they are different. Now, this article here is most of our DNA garbage. I know that I highlighted this one. Is also germane to this question of whether or not there are such things as races. Whether or not black people can constitute a race. The whole counter-racist argument about there not being race is a different thing. They want to say the only people who belong to a race are white people because, and the black people don't belong to a race, and that therefore black people cannot practice racism. The only people who can practice racism are white people because they're the only people who belong to a race. That's very internally consistent logic. The problem with that logic is that it doesn't match the physical phenomena in the physical world around us. It doesn't. It's again, it's social science trying to conflate itself with real science, trying to make what you want things to be into what things are. And to a certain extent, that's a great thing to do. But I mean, many times, you just cannot do that. And so they start talking about the human genome contains around 20,000 genes. That means instructions on how to make things or do things. That is stretches of DNA that encode proteins, but these genes account for only 1.2% of the total genome. The other 98.8% is known as non-coding DNA. They should not have said that even based on what they wrote in this article. What they should have said is that the other 98.8% is not known. It's not known what it does. Okay? So they used to say, well, since we don't know what it does, we don't know. We think we've accounted for all the things that, all the proteins that are required to make a human body, and those are 20,000. A gene is an instruction. It's not a really as specific a definition as you think. So even a gene is an interpretation of this piece of DNA, from what we can see from our experiments, tells the cells or the body to do a certain thing. Okay, and they can be of different lengths, but you could miss genes too, because you cannot come up with everything that nature has told the body to do during its tenure of life on this planet. So they should have just said, we only understand 1.2% of DNA. That's really what they should have said. And so they said that down here in the second part I highlighted. But in the past few years, the tide has shifted in the field of, I don't know, within the field, I guess, of DNA studies. Recent studies have revealed a wealth of new pieces of non-coding DNA, in other words, that make proteins, that do seem to be as important to our survival as our more familiar genes. Right. And so then they go on to say that in January, Francis Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, made a comment that revealed just how far the consensus has moved. At a healthcare conference in San Francisco, an audience member asked him about junk DNA, and he replied, that's a he, yeah, we don't use that term anymore. It was pretty much a case of hubris, meaning arrogance, to imagine that we could dispense with any part of the genome, as if we knew enough to say it wasn't functional. Most of the DNA that scientists once thought was just taking up space in the genome turns out to be doing stuff. So I think that there's stuff we're just beginning to learn we're just beginning to learn what makes humans tick in terms of DNA. So you really can't say on the basis of what has so far been discovered about DNA that black people are no different than anybody else, and that proves that race is hook'em and it's a farce and it doesn't exist. Beyond it being a social construction, which I have already demonstrated that it's a real thing based on its social construction, it's a physical thing most likely. You got to remember that they only know 1.2% of the DNA. Okay. It's the next one. So here is some more support. You probably saw this as I was flipping through and trying to get to the right PDFs. And this is something I posted more than 4 years ago, because I had seen something about supercentenarians, and every time I would see something in the news about, not every time, but at some point 4 years ago, and probably before that, I started to think, there are too many times when I see a news story about a person who is quite aged that they're black women. Black women only constitute 6%, maybe a little bit more, 6.5% of the population of people in the United States. Why is it that it seems to me, I don't know if it's true, but it seems to me every time I turn around, one of these really aged people is a black woman. And especially under the severe conditions of stress of anti-blackness that we've gone through, why would we be this disproportionate share of people who live a really long time? So I wanted to know if my impression was actually matching the facts. So I just looked up all the known supercentenarians in the United States on Wiki. They had the names and the dates of birth and everything. This was 4 years ago I did this, a little over 4.5 years ago. And so, I put them in columns: white males, white females, black males, black females, and then I added up how many there were all, and then took the percentage, and this is what I found out. This is that life force that I'm talking about. That black women are 300% more likely than white women to live to be 110 years old, despite everything we go through. We're 1,250% more likely to live to be 110 than black men, and 4,180% more likely to live to be quite aged, over 110 years of age, than white men. And if you look at it, the system of misogynoir anti-blackness, if you look at it, it's designed to compensate for that disadvantage, that greater life force, almost in that order. And then also in this same post, I said it is also well known that black and female premature babies are more likely to survive. That's a well-known thing. That's why they call it the wimpy white male. If you have a premature baby, the likelihood of it recovering fully or actually, not succumbing is greatest if it's a black female infant. That is followed by this one I'm not sure about. You'll have to check me. It's either white females or black males. But but white people who have males who are born premature, sons that are born premature, they have the least likelihood of recovering. Okay, so greater life force. It probably has something to do with mitochondrial DNA that is passed from mother to child. Even the black mother's DNA will be passed to her child because mitochondrial DNA does not come from the father. Although, of course, all of us have mitochondrial DNA, and mitochondrial DNA is the energy factory within any cell. Okay, and there was a longtime Facebook friend. I can't remember what she goes by on YouTube though, but she mentioned that she had her baby in Finland, and her baby was premature, and was a baby girl, but her husband is white because he's Finnish, and the doctors just came in and said, well, the likelihood of your baby being okay is good because black girls do very well with their premature. And then my friend asked the doctor, she said the Finnish doctors are very deadpan in how they do everything. They don't have any tact. So my friend said, well, does that make my child even less likely to recover? Does that make, because she's only half? Which is interesting. We're just talking this through. And the doctors replied, no, it really has to do with just the race of the mother. Now, at least maybe that part of biology is true. I'm certainly not saying that the only black people are that. I'm not certainly not saying that somebody with a black mother and a white father are black just because the mother is black. I'm not saying that. I'm just talking about a particular phenomenon within the biology or DNA of black people. That just this particular part might just have something to do with black female mitochondrial DNA. Something else might have to do with maybe Y DNA or genes as they're passed on, epigenetic stuff from the father. Okay, so there's some scientific evidence right there that black people have a greater life force. Let's go on, because I got something for you fellas too. But this is still women. So here's an article. Usually, yeah, people can see it. You have enough to be able to find this article. So so much is said, right? So much is said about how black women have been masculinized, how black women are just not as feminine as non-black women. And then there were even scientists who tried to say that the black women had more testosterone than other women, and that's why we weren't as feminine. But now, the science shows that in fact, black women have more estrogen than white women. Across the menstrual cycle, we have more estrogen. I'm always talking about something that I deleted that I didn't mean to delete, but I've said this before, and if it's not in here, if you push me, I'll find it another time, or you can find it yourself. But it is true that black women do have more testosterone. Let's see. Is this it? Or is this for you fellas? Yep, this is for the fellas. It is true. I'm trying to show that the black women have more testosterone. But all people have testosterone, right? If you don't have testosterone, you don't have any sex drive. Even all women have testosterone. The point is that black women have both more estrogen, more female hormones, and more male hormones. In other words, we're just We have more of a life force. Certainly, we have more estrogen than we do testosterone or androgens, male hormones, by a long shot. But just as every human has some of both, so do we. We just have a lot more of each, you know, either in the same proportion or we have more estrogen than other women. Okay, we just have, this is, again, what I think is some scientific undergirding for the reasons that non-black people have organized their affairs to keep us in check, because of the awe, because of the force that we contain as people. What Lothrop Stoddard said, what this Cohen guy said on YouTube, we have more life force. Okay, now, also true for the men. So, which one do I want to show first? Okay, I guess I'll show this one first. So, serum androgen levels in black, Hispanic, and white men. And I sure do hope that I highlighted it. I did. Black men had higher DHT. So in other words, let me just go to this paragraph right here. What they find is that black men don't have higher testosterone, which is only one male hormone, one androgen. And androgen is a male hormone. And for the longest time, they thought that the reason that black men were more susceptible to prostate cancer was because of higher levels of testosterone. But then when they actually tested it, they found out it's not true. Black men don't have higher testosterone. They do have higher DHT. Now, DHT is also a male hormone that can be converted into serum androgen, serum testosterone. It can be converted into testosterone. There are precursors. DHT, suffice it to say, DHT is like testosterone. It's a male hormone. And black men, after they do all of they adjust for this or that, black men have higher DHT levels and higher DHT to testosterone ratios than either white and Hispanic men. Okay? I think the next one shows that black men have more estrogen. Yep, that's it. So again, they thought that black men had more testosterone because black men, the way they move, they're just more, just so much more life force. Their androgen show, Anyway, so they, no, it's not true that black men have more testosterone, although they have more male hormones, period, and they can convert DHT into testosterone. So no, they don't have more testosterone. They do have more estrogen. So now we see something similar. Black men have more male hormones than non-black men. But they also have more female hormones. Isn't that something? So it's the same thing with black men as it is with black women. More overall life force. All men have some estrogen. They just have more testosterone than estrogen. All men have male hormones and female hormones. But in the main, except for these little intersex and exceptions, in the main, males have more male hormones than female hormones. In the main. It's just, and that's what the case is for black men. They just have more of everything. As we saw was also the case for black women, that women in the main have far more estrogens or female hormones than male hormones. We have some of both. It doesn't matter the race. But when it comes to race, black women have more of both. We have more life force. What's next? So you would expect life force. I mean, one way you could make a synonym for life force would be the fountain of youth, or maybe a little tiny stream of youth. You would expect people with a higher life force, with all other things being equal. This is why things are not equal. This is why the system exists, because it's a compensatory system. All other things being equal, the people with the greatest life force, which may be all contained in mitochondrial DNA of black people, or probably is other places too, but you would expect for them to age more slowly. Do we not know that to be the case? Yeah. So here's one mechanism of it in the face. Usually we think about an aging face as being one that is more wrinkled, or one where the skin sags more, but there's more to it than that. They found out that the facial bones of black adults age differently than, they probably don't say non-black. They probably say white. No, they actually do. They go ahead and say other races, just as you saw in the studies that talked about male and female hormones. They didn't just restrict it to comparing black to white. They had Hispanics and Asians in there too. Okay, so yeah, our facial bones age more slowly as when we're adults. It's not just the skin. Facial bones in black adults maintain higher mineral density as they age than other races, resulting in fewer changes to their facial structure. And we also know that to be true for skin. Our skin ages more slowly, and our bones age more slowly. Here comes the tricky part. I've never had so many PDFs up, so let's make sure it works. And there's a reason for that. Okay, so here's some more evidence of the life force. So this comes from Oxford Academic. You can look up here at the top of the thing and you can see. No one has told me, Kofi hasn't told me that my PDFs aren't showing. So yeah, they're showing. Okay. So the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, measures of body composition in blacks and whites, a comparative review. Some of you, there are very, very small, as a handful of you who heard me be a guest on a YouTube platform called ACVN. And I tried to explain this as I was his guest. I'm not sure how receptive he was to it. He deleted it, and so that's fine. You see who the authors are and so on. And I don't think we really need to go any further than the abstract. Well, if I highlighted it, probably should. All right, how are black people different than other than white people or people who are admixed? And by the way, all these other different kinds of people, the evidence seems to be that they are admixed. So there's basically the black type and the white type, the basic divisions, and then throughout time they admixed with one another in various ways, and that's what makes for the greatest population of the earth being sort of in between black and white, the extremes. But as over time, as there have been anthropologists and so on who have tried to meaningfully categorize the different kinds of people, they used to say there were three basic types of people: the Mongoloids, the Caucasians, the white people, and the Negroid. And they actually, even though in Australia they call them black because it describes their color, but the Australian Aborigines is the way we think of them, with the straight hair. As late as the 1960s, they were considered Caucasians. I mean, people see what they're looking at. It's just like what Lathrop Stoddard said, you can look at all these other people, but my goodness, when you look at these black people, they look so different. And then they get around this thing, oh, they act different. Oh my, and it's not all bad. You don't have to, just because something's different doesn't mean it's a negative. Okay, so abstract. Biological differences exist in the body composition of blacks and whites. Blacks have, I'm just going to read the parts I highlighted unless I figure out something I missed. Blacks have greater bone mineral density and body protein content than do whites. Translation. Our bones are more sturdy. They are more dense. They are made of more of what it should be. They're not as fragile. They're not fragile. They're very, very sturdy because they have more mineral in them. And we have more muscle content on our bodies. It has nothing to do with take two men of the same height or two women of the same height, and that they take up the same volume of space. One is that you measure all the way across. They take up the same volume, but both their bones and their muscles will be more dense, more muscle tissue per unit of area, and more bone tissue per unit of area. So our muscles and our bones are more dense, but not only that, we have more muscle on those bones, on our skeletons, and our bones, particularly our femurs, and there's another word for the bone that is between the shoulder and the elbow is longer and thicker. They've done that by measuring cadavers. And then also our femurs, which is our thigh bone, is longer and thicker. So longer and thicker and more dense, and got more muscle that is more dense. Okay. Okay. I'll read this sentence again. Blacks have a greater bone mineral density and body protein content than do whites, resulting in a greater fat-free bone density. Additionally, there are racial differences in the distribution of subcutaneous fat. That means the stuff that's right underneath your skin, the jiggly stuff. and the length of the limbs relative to the trunk. We have longer arms and legs, as I've said. Biological variation between the races in these body composition indexes has practical significance. Systematic error can result in an inaccurate estimation of the relative body fat of blacks and therefore of definitions of obesity if these inherent differences aren't ignored. Inherent, in other words, inherited. If these inherited differences between the black group, the black race, and is it enough now? Are we getting to the point now where we can say race is real? Yeah, they're saying it's inherited, and they have taken into account all the other effects could possibly be, and that's just what it came out to. Again, we're sturdier. We have more of everything. We have more of everything that it takes to be here. We age slower. Take racism, white supremacy away, we might be living to be 150 years old on the average. Did I say racism, white supremacy? Smack me through your tablet or your phone. Just like give me a virtual smack, or give me a virtual smack in the chat room. Racism, anti-blackness. I'll take a slap for that. Okay. And then it goes on in the introduction that talks about fat-free body mass, and that they're based on assumptions that they're the same for everybody. And then down here it says, thus, whereas the two-component model equations, in other words, you take somebody's height, you take somebody's weight, and then you factor in a bunch of constants, put a bunch of numbers in there, and you come up with an equation that is supposed to estimate body fat. Okay, so that's what they do, and so that the two variables are height and weight. Well, they're saying that two-component system, height and weight, to make equations to estimate body fat, that you can't use that on black people, because it's not suitable for black people to determine fat-free body mass. It's suitable for white people. This is not anything new for a lot of you who I've known for quite a while. Is there anything else? Okay, I'll read this one. I mean, it's repetition, but I can't assume that anybody who's listening to this has listened to all my videos or heard me speak over on Blog Talk. When public health policies are being established or research is being conducted on the prevalence of obesity or obesity-related diseases, an inaccurate assessment of body fat can affect research findings and have far-reaching implications. This is especially important for the black population because, as Kumanyika noted, black Americans have a high prevalence of obesity-related diseases. Maybe they're not obesity-related. Maybe they're stress-related. Maybe they're related to something called allostatic load, which I think I have here. In addition, the most recent update of the third National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey indicates that 52% of black women are overweight. However, this data used a crude indicator of obesity, the body mass index, which only takes into account height and weight, as the criterion for overweight. And they tell you what it is. You know, this calculation comes out to be 27.8 for men and 27.3 for women. They say body mass index, which is this BMI down here, correctly identified obesity in only 50.6% of a racially mixed sample. They don't mean racially mixed people. They mean that of the people they sampled, some of them were black, some of them were white, some of them were Hispanic. And there were 230 women and 150 men. And then they go on to say, well, they don't, a current popular theory may partially explain the high prevalence of obesity. That's if we actually are, but we know BMI doesn't do that. It says that apparently we don't spend as much energy when we're resting and when we're sleeping as other people. But they say that one can only speculate. It starts right here. One can only speculate to what extent the use of more accurate race-specific formula to determine body fat would have even on the metabolic rate, because the metabolic rate is itself based upon what they believe to be the truth, something that's true for all people in terms of the composition of the body. And it's just not true for everybody. Black people have a different body composition, so our metabolic rate, the way you compute it's going to be different. Is there anything else that I highlighted here before I go on to the next PDF? And by the way, Kofi, if I don't, if I haven't covered the things that you want to be covered, could you text me, call me? You know, maybe we can set up the Skype line and I can address the things that you wanted to be covered. Um, this one talks about body water. Black people seem to have more water in our body compared to non-black people. Hmm. Okay, let's see, is there anything else? Oh, the skeletal weights, we talked about that. It's the same throughout the lifespan from newborns all the way to, being a supercentenarian, 110 years plus. Um, yeah, I think that's enough for that one. Okay, let's see what's on this next one. Okay, now, I think what I have done is set. I don't hear anything from you. I think what I have done is set up the basis for the statement that race is in fact real. It is real on two counts, or one broken down. It is socially real. It has social impacts. We know that because of the statistics on life expectancy, poverty, home ownership, education, access to sanitation, disease rates, all of that. We know that it has uh, a realness because of that. And then we know that that social construction is quite likely based upon a correct assessment by non-black people all over the planet that we are more, that we have a greater life force, and that therefore we have to be contained because we could take over everything. You let us into anything. The question becomes, why didn't we get it? Now, we've talked about it before, but I don't want to discuss it now. You can discuss that as a separate issue later as to how we got into the situation where we're locked out of everything. How did that happen? How did we not anticipate that these people had a problem with us? I mean, I can see why we didn't anticipate it, but after we saw demonstrations of it, why did it take us so long? Because today, I don't think that the majority of black people on the planet believe that it's inherent. So we still haven't gotten it, I don't think. Because I think that's where the evidence is. Even if it's not true, I think this, clearly that's what the strongest evidence is. But regardless of all that, the thing is that race is socially constructed by non-black people to keep us out, to contain us, because our life force would have us excel. And I hate to say it, but particularly to Americans, Native Black Americans, would have us excel in everything. And so the sentence I was about to finish was, you let us into anything, we take it over. And you can try to keep us down. That's what movies like Men of Honor are about, where Cuba Gooding Jr., after he got his light cut and everything else, he still finished it. And then he managed to become one of the most decorated, deep sea diver ever. You give us great disadvantages, we still do it. You take the Williams girls who had to practice, their parents didn't know anything about tennis. He had to learn it from scratch, from TV and books. And they were practicing on tennis courts that had holes and potholes that nobody ever played on. They didn't have any lights on them in Compton. And look at them, greatest tennis players that ever lived. I'm not going to say anything about Tiger Woods because I don't consider him black, but maybe, the black part of him probably contributed to why he's the greatest golfer of all time. You give us the most feared computer hackers are young black kids. Race car driving, computer programming. Let us in. That's what Hidden Colors was, not Hidden Colors, Hidden Figures was about. And those were black women. They didn't even talk about the black men. They were much more numerous. Does that tell you something? Anything that we put our hands on because of our greater life force, we excel in it. Now, we may do it with a different style than other people. So they have to hold us back so that they can stay on top of things. The question is, why are they so afraid for us to excel? Are they afraid we're going to beat them down, that we're not going to help them if we excel? It's something just primitive in them. that fears what is different and more powerful. I think it might be that. I'm thinking as I talk. Because if something seems very powerful and you don't have control of it, and you don't understand everything that makes that thing tick, I think that would tend to make any creature fearful. Make any creature fearful. This is a little, just because this is getting dry, and I don't even know if you'll find this story, it's not a long story, interesting, but to go along with this thing of fearing anything that you think is different and powerful. I mean, I can't explain why, but there have been times when maybe was going, how I was working out as I was either jogging or walking up hills. And, because of the neighborhood I live in, a lot of the black guys here and some of the Mexicans, they have Rottweilers and they have pit bulls. And they don't always take great care of them. And so sometimes they'll be just running loose in the neighborhood. And so there weren't, there were 3 or 4 times, maybe more than that, where they were running loose in the neighborhood. Then I had to go up on somebody's porch and wait till they went away. But there were 2 times when the dog slipped the leash, or the dog was just out, and it was inches from me. And fangs snarling, saliva coming out of his mouth, and it was barking at me, and his tail was stiff. It was really like it was gonna, and I just, from training, I guess, I just learned I had to calm down. So I can make myself calm down, just super calm, and just stare at it as it's barking fiercely. And in both cases, the dogs started whimpering and turned around, because they're like, there's something about my body language or something. They looked at me and I haven't seen this before. I don't know what this is. And it's taller than me. I don't know what she's going to do. So I think that may just be a primitive thing. Known quantities are less troublesome to us. They cause us less fear than the things that we think we understand. So that, I thought I had laid the foundation for that. Now, this refusal to accept that race is real, and that everybody's gotten used to everybody. The only people they haven't gotten used to, non-black people have gotten used to each other in all their different forms. All the evidence shows that, but going back, really a long time, but certainly now. When I say a long time, I mean centuries. They've gotten used to it, and now they've really gotten used to it. I have demonstrated that. That guy Mark Krikorian, said that Asians and Hispanics who are born in this country are considered white. Okay, I'm repeating myself, I know, but because you don't understand why. Not everyone has heard that before. But this contention that we're not different is causing us a lot of problems. So you try to do the same things to us to determine whether or not we're in a certain predicament, and it doesn't work. So for the longest time, I remember I got diagnosed with having low vitamin D. But in fact, I did not. And so this is an article that says, I'll just read it. This was from NPR. By the current blood test for vitamin D, when was this? This is a few years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago, 2013. To a lot of you, that's not a few years. By the current blood test for vitamin D, most African Americans are deficient. That can lead to weak bones. So many doctors prescribe supplement pills to bring their levels up. I always knew this didn't make any sense, because I knew that black people had stronger bones. I knew that black women had almost zero chance, if you were phenotypically black and didn't just look, mixed. I knew we had almost, zero chance when we got to be postmenopausal of getting osteoporosis, because we have such great bone mineral density, which I already showed in previous PDFs on this video. So I just knew it didn't make any sense. But anyway, the problem is with the test, not the patients. You see, this is what happens when you make assumptions that are not true about black people being the same as everybody else. The problem is with the vitamin D test, not the patients. According to a new study, the vast majority of African Americans have plenty of the form of vitamin D that counts, the type their cells can readily use. The research resolves a long-standing paradox. The population in the United States with the best bone health happens to be the African American populations. population, says Dr. Ravi Thadani, a professor of medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital and lead author of the study. But almost 80% of these individuals are defined as having vitamin D deficiency. This was perplexing. To unravel the mystery, Thadani and his colleagues looked closely at various forms of vitamin D in the blood of over 2,000 Baltimore residents, black and white. They focused on a form of vitamin called hydroxyvitamin D, which makes up most of the vitamin circulating in the blood. It's the form that the standard test measures, not what's in your cells, but in your blood. Not your blood cells, but your other cells. The 25-hydroxy form is tightly bound to a protein, and as a result, bone cells, immune cells, and other tissues that need vitamin D can't take it up. 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D. For Caucasians, blood levels of 25-hydroxyvitamin D are a pretty good proxy. Just like BMI is a pretty good proxy for them for how fat they are. For Caucasians, the levels of this 25-hydroxyvitamin D are a pretty good proxy for how much of the bioavailable, I'm just stumbling all over the place today, bioavailable vitamin they have, but not for blacks. Anything else? Okay. So that's a problem. You just keep insisting that race isn't real. It's just a social construction that doesn't have there's no physical basis to it. No, medical scientists know that race is real. Another example. Which one is this? Oh, this is about blood sugar. As you can see, came from CNN. We'll be able to see it as best we can, because when you PDF something, ads and stuff can get in the way. But anyway, so I'll start from the beginning. I think your doctor. Well, let me make sure that I didn't highlight anything. Okay, wish I had, but I didn't. I will summarize to say this, since I didn't highlight it. A1C is a test that doctors use to determine what your blood sugar average has been over 3 months. You can, of course, have them test your blood sugar on a particular day, whether fasting or non-fasting. But A1C is supposed to measure what it's been, not just on the day that you go to the lab or the doctor, but what it's been for 3 months as you've been moving around and eating what you eat. So A1C is supposed to measure what your actual blood sugar levels are over those 3 months. But they found out that it's really not accurate for black people, that it overestimates the blood sugar. Just like BMI overestimates fatness for black people, A1C overestimates daily blood sugar. Now, some people, you'll obviously have, diabetes. You need to do what you need to do to take care of that. But a lot of black people are being diagnosed as pre-diabetic based on an A1C test. And so maybe you just a little bit over the limit, but actually your blood sugar is not high. And pre-diabetes, that's a whole ruse and its own, own thing. But so now we've seen it with the vitamin D test. We've seen it with A1C, which is blood sugar testing. Again, their tests don't work for us. Where else do we see it? Okay. Same thing with glomerular filtration rates, which is a measure of kidney function. And so I just took a screenshot of this. Healthy GFR, that's what glomerular filtration rate means by race. And then it says, why does GFR, why is it different for African Americans? And they say it is due to higher average muscle mass of African Americans, which is what I already, in a previous PDF showed you. We have more muscle mass. So, and it doesn't matter, you don't have to be some hulky, thick person. We just have more muscle mass. Even if we're just the same size as anybody else, we're going to have more muscle mass and more bone mass, and we're going to be heavier. But if you have more muscle mass, then your GFR is going to be different. It should be higher because, how did I do that? because we have to clear our creatine. I wonder why that looks like that. Can I make it smaller? No. Anyways, we generate more creatine because we have more muscle mass. So now we've got kidney function tests, blood sugar level tests, and what's the other one? Vitamin D level tests, body mass index tests, all different from us than others. And it doesn't say on your blood count levels, it doesn't say non-white. What it says is there's two different categories, black and non-black. Black and non-black. And if you go through any of the research I showed you today, and you do your own research, you'll find that there's a little bit of fluctuation between Asians and Europeans, and whether you're talking about South Asians or Northeast Asians, but not much. The big gaps in these biological markers are between black and non-black, not between white and non-white. So those are the biological underpinning of the greater life force that non-black people experience when they're around us, and thereby they compensate with a system of worldwide anti-blackness. And it is a social construction, and it's real because they've made it real. Remember, symbolism for things and the things themselves can be different. We make meaning of those things if they have meaning to us. Well, clearly, and when I say we, I'm talking about people. So clearly, non-black people have made meaning out of our phenotypical difference because it is correlated with this higher life force. That just scares them. And yet they know they need it. When they're looking for something creative in technology or any place else, you know where they go to. I had a Joe Rogan snippet up. If I can find it, I'll show it to you. Because is this it? Nah, it's not it. I'm going to see if I can find it. And show you what he said about it. It'll be a nice little way to end it if nobody calls. Before I do that, to be a good host though, I should put on a picture again. It's more fun to look at, huh? Which of those people are black? Anywho. Let's see what white men say about black men. I gotta go into, or should I? Which one should I do? I think I will just go here into my Google history and put in Rogan, because it should already be queued up. Gosh, he's such a big, oh no. You know what, I'm not going to do that because they're already on me. So let me just tell you what Joe Rogan said. So he had this guest on, and they were discussing IQ. And they were discussing this guy, I've forgotten what his first name is, Richard, I think. His last name is Murray. He wrote a book called The Bell Curve in the early 90s. And it was all about how black people's IQ is just naturally lower. We're just naturally less intelligent than other people. And so this other guy was on there, and he was talking about how, well, that was quite an operation for people to come up with some test, they said, measures intelligence overall. Intelligence is multifaceted. It's not just one thing. And so then that led into Joe Rogan saying, it's very curious, however, how white people don't have a problem with saying that Asians are smarter, have a naturally higher BMI. You see where my mind is. Higher IQ. They're just naturally smarter people. Now, I've worked with a lot of Asians, and I saw a YouTube video of a black girl who is an architect in Japan, and she says they're rote learners. They're not very imaginative. That's been my experience, especially as a teacher, a high school teacher in geometry and so on, and algebra. But anyway, so he said, but I think the reason they do that is because it's to try to compensate for how jealous they are of the intelligences that black men have, particularly white men. The black men are all the outliers in athletics and in music. The Jimi Hendrixes, the Miles Davises, the John Coltrane's, the Michael Jordans, etc., the Usain Bolts. And what we know about athleticism is that it isn't just about having a superior physical form. What we know about athleticism is that it is a neurological ability. You have to neurologically be able to coordinate things. Amos Wilson talked about the greater speed of neural development. What are you calling it? Fine motor and gross motor coordination of black infants. This is a neurological thing. Okay, and what it is, and we even know that it is athletic ability apart from just being well balanced physically. Athletic ability is your mind's ability to create algorithms about how your own body and how foreign objects are going to react to gravity in the environment. So your mind has made an algorithm as to calculate the speed at which you must do something, the speed at which something's going to come back to you. You've got all these algorithms going on in your head, and the people who have the most efficient algorithms, along with, of course, having a good physical form, but you can't just have a great physical form. There are a lot of people who are very strong and symmetrically built and so on, but they're not great athletes, not even necessarily fast runners. That's because it's neurological, right? Because there are people who there doesn't seem to be anything physically wrong with their legs. But if you cut the spinal cord, which goes up to your brain, you can't operate those legs. It's a type of intelligence. Oh my God, am I showing stuff I don't want to be showing? I'm not. Okay. So, did I finish everything that I wanted to say to demonstrate that race is real? Sometimes I hate having to go through all this stuff because I don't really think people care. Like, the longer something is, the more work I put into demonstrating something. They don't care about, a lot of people just don't care about facts. A few do, I do it for those few. But sometimes it's like, I find it interesting, but that maybe because I might have low latency inhibition. So I'm always trying to look at the same stuff with a new set of eyes, in detail. But I hope that accomplished what you wanted it to accomplish, my colleague, Max/Kofi. If it didn't, I'm on my way to the chat room to see. Okay. I don't see you saying that I missed anything. Do you want to call into the chat line, to the conference line, and talk about it, or did I hit it? You can either type it in the chat box right now. Oh, you texted me. Okay. He said my points were sufficient for him. I'm glad to hear that. It's now 6:30. I think I started about 4:30, so that's pretty good. 2 hours. I don't think people have too much tolerance for. Thank you, Kofi. I hit all the points for longer than that. So what I'm going to do for today is I'm going to say Bruno Mars is not black. He's got somebody standing next to him who's been controversial on this venue, who I say is black. but the race is real. It's a social construction, and the social construction tells us that there are only two races, black and non-black. We know that by looking at the international and national data. And with that, I will be signing off. Until the next time I get a chance to come at y'all, please be safe, stay healthy, and like, sub, and share this content or any other content that you think will be helpful. I could play you this one thing. I'm not going to do it, about the Negro being the form of the head. I've got data coming out my ears to show that whether or not somebody's black is a composite impression, and there's data and historical information that goes back a couple centuries, but also up to the current day that validates that. And that's why I can say that somebody on the left there, Cardi B, I could say that she's black, whereas I can say Bruno Mars is not, because it's a holistic impression, not just about skin color. And again, I've got historical evidence, and I've got modern day evidence on that, where they've studied that. So that being said, this really is good night. Stay safe, stay healthy. Like, sub, subscribe, all that good stuff. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.